The widow stood at the edge of her husband's fresh grave, while the entire town of Quartzsite, Arizona, whispered behind gloved hands and pointed accusing fingers. But she refused to shed a single tear where these vultures could see her break. It was October 1883, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small gathering of mourners who had come not to pay respects, but to watch Penelope Owens crumble under the weight of their judgment. Her black mourning dress clung to her frame, the fabric heavy and suffocating in the Arizona heat, but she stood straight-backed and defiant as the preacher droned on about souls and salvation. "Shame on her," someone muttered loud enough for Penelope to hear. "Poor Thomas. He deserved better than a wife who poisoned his supper." Penelope's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the simple wooden coffin being lowered into the ground. Thomas had been dead for 3 days, struck down by what the town doctor called acute gastric distress, but what the townspeople had decided was deliberate poisoning at her hand. Never mind that she had loved her husband with every fiber of her being. Never mind that she had been the one to hold him through the night as he writhed in agony, begging the doctor to save him. Never mind that her own heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces when he drew his last rattling breath. The funeral ended with uncomfortable speed, and people began dispersing quickly, as though they feared contamination from standing too close to a suspected murderess. Penelope remained at the graveside, watching as 2 workers began shoveling dirt onto her husband's coffin. The sound of earth hitting wood felt like hammer blows to her chest. Mrs. Owens. The banker, Mr. Whitmore, approached with obvious reluctance, his round face slick with perspiration. "I must inform you that the bank will be calling in the loan on your property. Given the circumstances, we cannot in good conscience continue our business arrangement." Penelope turned to face him, her green eyes blazing with suppressed fury. "My husband has been dead for 3 days, Mr. Whitmore. 3 days. And you come to me at his graveside to discuss finances." The banker had the decency to look ashamed, but he pressed on. "I have my other customers to think about, madam. Their deposits, their trust. I cannot be seen supporting someone accused of such a heinous crime." "Accused by whom?" Penelope demanded. "There has been no trial, no evidence presented. Just gossip and speculation from people who have nothing better to do than tear down a grieving widow. The court of public opinion matters in a town this size," Whitmore said stiffly. "I am sorry, but you have 30 days to settle your accounts or vacate the property." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Penelope alone with the grave diggers and her crushing grief. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and now no home. Thomas had been her entire world since they married 4 years ago, and in the span of less than a week, everything had been stripped away from her. The walk back to her small ranch on the outskirts of town felt endless. The October sun was unforgiving, and by the time she reached her front door, her head was pounding and her mouth was dry as cotton. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, filled with memories of happier times that now seemed like they belonged to someone else's life. She removed her heavy black hat and veil, setting them on the kitchen table where Thomas used to sit every morning drinking his coffee and reading whatever newspaper had made its way from Phoenix. Penelope sank into a chair and finally allowed herself to weep. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her soul, the kind of crying that left her breathless and aching. She cried for Thomas, for the life they would never have, for the children they had hoped to raise together. She cried for herself, for the terrible position she found herself in, blamed for the death of the man she loved more than life itself. When the tears finally subsided, she was left hollow and exhausted. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple that Thomas had always loved. He had been a good man, gentle and kind, with dreams of building their ranch into something prosperous. He had worked himself nearly to exhaustion, often skipping meals and pushing through illness to tend to their small herd of cattle and maintain their property. It was that exhaustion, Penelope believed, that had finally caught up with him. His body had simply given out. But the town had another theory. Sarah Cunningham, the general store owner's wife and the biggest gossip in Quartzsite, had seen Penelope purchasing rat poison 2 weeks before Thomas fell ill. Never mind that they had a rodent problem in the barn, or that half the ranchers in the territory used the same poison. Sarah had taken that innocent purchase and woven it into a tale of a scheming wife who wanted her husband dead, perhaps for another man or perhaps for his meager assets. The story had spread like wildfire through the small community, growing more elaborate with each retelling. The sound of horses approaching made Penelope's heart race with anxiety. She moved to the window and peered out, half expecting to see a lynch mob coming for her. Instead, she saw 3 riders, their faces hard and unfriendly in the dying light. She recognized them as ranch hands who worked for Samuel Pritchard, the largest landowner in the area, and a man who had made no secret of his interest in acquiring her property. They dismounted and approached the house with the swagger of men who believed themselves untouchable. The leader, a rough-looking man with a scarred face, pounded on her door with unnecessary force. "Mrs. Owens, open up. We need to have a word." Penelope considered not answering, but she knew that would only make things worse. She squared her shoulders, wiped the tear tracks from her face, and opened the door just wide enough to see out. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Pritchard sent us with a message," the scarred man said. "He is willing to make you a generous offer for your land, more than generous considering your situation. $500 and you can leave town with your reputation intact." "My land is worth 10 times that, and you know it," Penelope replied. "Tell Mr. Pritchard that my property is not for sale at any price." The man's expression darkened. "You might want to reconsider, madam. Things could get difficult for you here. Real difficult. A woman alone, with everyone thinking she is a murderer. That is a dangerous position to be in." The threat was clear, but Penelope refused to be intimidated. "Get off my property. Now." The men exchanged glances, and for a moment Penelope thought they might force their way inside. But then they heard another horse approaching at a gallop, and they turned to see who was coming. The rider who appeared was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. Even in the fading light, Penelope could see that he was younger than the men threatening her, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair and a strong jaw. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty and well-worn, and there was a rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Evening, gentlemen," the newcomer said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Seems like a strange time to be paying a social call on a lady in mourning." "This is none of your concern, Hawkins," the scarred man said. "Move along." So his name was Hawkins, Penelope thought, studying the man who had interrupted what was quickly becoming a threatening situation. There was something solid and dependable about him, even at a distance. "I reckon it is my concern when I see 3 armed men surrounding a widow's home after dark," Hawkins replied. He had not drawn his weapon, but his hand rested casually near it. "Mrs. Owens, are these men bothering you?" Penelope felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger. "They were just leaving," she said firmly. The scarred man looked like he wanted to argue, but Hawkins had positioned his horse between them and their own mounts. After a tense moment, The three men stalked back to their horses and rode off into the gathering darkness, throwing angry looks over their shoulders. Hawkins waited until they were out of sight before dismounting and approaching the porch. Up close, Penelope could see that he had kind eyes, a deep brown that seemed to see right through her defenses. There was a gentleness to his features, despite the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the harsh desert sun. "Matthew Hawkins, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I am sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man." "You knew my husband?" Penelope asked, surprised. "We worked together on a cattle drive about 2 years back before he married you and settled down here. He talked about you the whole time, could not wait to get back to his bride. He loved you something fierce, Mrs. Owens. Anyone who spent 5 minutes with him knew that." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought fresh tears to Penelope's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are the first person in days to say something kind about him, about us." Matthew's jaw tightened. "I have heard what people are saying in town. It is nothing but cruel gossip from folks who ought to know better. Thomas would never have married a woman capable of harming him. He was too good a judge of character for that." "Most people do not seem to share your opinion," Penelope said bitterly. "Most people are fools," Matthew replied bluntly. "They would rather believe an exciting lie than a boring truth. But I know the truth, Mrs. Owens. I saw how sick Thomas was getting these past few months, how he kept pushing himself when he should have been resting. I tried to talk to him about it, but he said he had to build something worthy of you." Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. "You saw him recently?" "I have been working at the Brennan Ranch, just east of here. I ran into Thomas in town a few times over the past couple months. Each time he looked worse, thinner, more exhausted. I told him he needed to see a proper doctor, maybe go to Phoenix, but he said he could not afford the time away from his ranch." This confirmed what Penelope had suspected all along. Thomas had not been poisoned. He had worked himself to death trying to build a future for them, ignoring the warning signs his body had been giving him. The knowledge brought both relief and a crushing sadness. "The town doctor said it was acute gastric distress," Penelope said. "But no one wanted to believe it could be natural causes. It was easier to blame me." "People in this town have nothing better to do than gossip," Matthew said with disgust. "But I will not stand by and watch them destroy an innocent woman's life because they need entertainment." "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Hawkins, but I am not sure there is anything anyone can do at this point. The damage is done. The banker has called in my loan, people cross the street to avoid me, and Mr. Pritchard's men are threatening me to sell my land for a fraction of what it is worth." Matthew's expression turned thunderous. "Pritchard is behind this. He has wanted this land for years. The creek that runs through my property is one of the most reliable water sources in the area. With me disgraced and desperate, he probably thought I would be easy to intimidate into selling." "That snake," Matthew muttered. "I worked for him briefly when I first came to the territory. He is as crooked as they come, but he has money and influence, so people look the other way." They stood in silence for a moment, the desert night settling around them with its chorus of crickets and distant coyote calls. Penelope realized she was standing in her doorway talking to a strange man in the darkness, something that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and Matthew Hawkins had just done more for her than anyone else in this town. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Hawkins?" she asked. "It is the least I can offer after you chased those men away." Matthew hesitated, clearly aware of how it would look if anyone saw him entering a widow's home after dark. But then he nodded. "I would appreciate that, madam, and please call me Matthew." "Only if you call me Penelope," she replied, opening the door wider to let him in. Matthew tied his horse to the porch rail and followed her inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with homemade curtains on the windows and a few personal touches that spoke of a couple trying to build a life together. Matthew could see evidence of Thomas's work everywhere. A rocking chair he had built, shelves he had installed, a half-finished cradle in the corner that made his heart ache. Penelope saw him looking at the cradle, and her expression crumpled for a moment before she forced it back under control. "We were hoping to start a family soon," she said quietly. "Thomas built that last month. He said he wanted to be prepared." "I am truly sorry, Penelope," Matthew said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The unfairness of her situation struck him deeply. Here was a woman who had lost everything through no fault of her own, now being persecuted by people who should have been supporting her. Penelope busied herself with making coffee, grateful to have something to do with her hands. As she worked, Matthew found himself studying her more closely. She was beautiful, he realized, though grief had drawn shadows under her eyes and hollowed her cheeks. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and there was a strength to her bearing that spoke of a will that had not been broken despite everything she had endured. "How long have you been in Quartzsite?" Penelope asked as she poured the coffee. "About 8 months now. I have been drifting for a few years, working ranches all over the territory. My parents had a spread up in Colorado, but they passed when I was 22. I sold the place and headed south, figured I would see some country before settling down again." "And have you found a place you want to settle?" Matthew accepted the coffee cup she offered him, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "I have been thinking about it lately. I am 28 now, not getting any younger. Seems like it might be time to put down roots somewhere." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Thomas used to sit, but somehow it did not feel wrong to have Matthew there. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made Penelope feel less alone than she had in days. "Tell me what happened," Matthew said gently. "If you want to talk about it, I mean. Sometimes it helps to tell someone who will actually listen." Penelope wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from it even though the night was not particularly cold. "Thomas had been working so hard," she began. "Too hard, I kept telling him. He would be out before dawn and not come back until after dark. He stopped eating properly, said his stomach was bothering him, but he did not have time to worry about it. Then one night, about 2 weeks ago, he came home in terrible pain, doubling over, sweating, barely able to stand." She paused, the memory clearly painful. Matthew waited patiently, letting her take her time. "I wanted to ride for the doctor immediately, but Thomas said it would pass, that he just needed to rest. By morning he seemed better, so he went back to work. But it kept happening, these attacks of pain and sickness. Finally, 3 nights ago, it got so bad that I rode into town myself to fetch Dr. Morrison. But by the time we got back, Thomas was barely conscious. He died just before dawn." "And the doctor's official diagnosis?" Matthew asked. "Acute gastric distress leading to organ failure. He said Thomas's body had been under severe strain for some time, and it simply gave out. But Sarah Cunningham had seen me buy rat poison a few weeks earlier, and she started telling people that I must have poisoned him. Never mind that we have always had rodents in the barn. Never mind that I loved my husband more than anything in this world." The anguish in her voice was unmistakable, and Matthew felt a surge of anger toward the people who had done this to her. "Did anyone actually accuse you to your face before the funeral?" "No, they were content to whisper behind my back until then. At the funeral, it got worse. People openly saying I should be arrested, that I was a murderess. Some of Thomas's distant relatives even refused to speak to me. And now Pritchard's men are threatening me, and the bank is taking my home, and I have nowhere to go and no way to defend myself." "You are not alone," Matthew said firmly. "Not anymore. I will not let them destroy you, Penelope." She looked up at him with those green eyes full of pain and confusion. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I knew Thomas, and he was a good man who loved you. That is enough for me. Besides, I have never been able to stomach bullies and gossips. This town needs to hear the truth, and someone needs to stand up and tell it to them." "They will not listen to you," Penelope warned. "They have already made up their minds." "Then I will make them listen," Matthew said with quiet determination. They talked late into the night, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Penelope felt a small spark of hope. Matthew told her stories about the cattle drive he had shared with Thomas, painting a picture of her husband as capable and well-liked among the other cowboys. He made her laugh with tales of mishaps on the trail, and he listened with genuine compassion when she shared memories of her marriage. When Matthew finally prepared to leave, well past midnight, he paused at the door. "I will be back tomorrow," he said. "We need to figure out a plan to clear your name and save your property. But tonight, you should try to get some rest. And Penelope, lock this door behind me and keep Thomas's rifle close. If Pritchard's men come back, fire a warning shot and I will hear it from the Brennan place." "Thank you, Matthew," Penelope said, and she meant it from the bottom of her heart. "I do not know why you are helping me, but I am grateful." "Get some rest," he repeated, then mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness. Penelope locked the door as instructed and checked that the rifle was loaded and within easy reach. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe a little easier. Someone believed her. Someone was willing to stand by her side against the tide of public opinion. It did not solve her problems, but it gave her something she had been sorely lacking: hope. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of beautiful fall day that made the desert come alive with color. Penelope rose early despite her exhaustion, driven by nervous energy and the need to keep busy. She tended to the chickens, milked the cow, and tried to focus on the normal routines that had once defined her days. But everything felt different now, colored by grief and uncertainty about the future. Matthew arrived just after breakfast, riding up to the house with a determined expression on his face. He was freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, clearly having taken care with his appearance. "Good morning," he called out. "Are you ready to face down some gossips?" Penelope stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "What do you mean?" "I mean it is Sunday, and the whole town will be gathering for church service in a few hours. That is where we make our stand. That is where I tell everyone exactly what kind of woman you really are." Fear gripped Penelope's heart. "Matthew, I cannot go into town. You saw how they treated me at the funeral. It will be even worse now." "That is exactly why you need to go," Matthew said, dismounting and approaching the porch. "If you hide out here, you are admitting guilt in their eyes. But if you walk into that church with your head held high, it shows them you have nothing to be ashamed of, and I will be right beside you." "They will not listen to you," Penelope repeated her warning from the night before. "Maybe not," Matthew acknowledged, "but I have to try. We have to try. Otherwise, Pritchard wins, the gossips win, and an innocent woman loses everything because people would rather believe the worst than search for the truth." Penelope looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an avenging angel, willing to risk his own reputation to defend hers. She barely knew him, yet he was offering her more loyalty and support than people she had known for years. It gave her courage she did not know she possessed. "All right," she said quietly. "I will go, but I need time to get ready." "Take all the time you need," Matthew said. "I will wait." Penelope went back inside and changed into her best morning dress, a slightly nicer version of what she had worn to the funeral. She pinned up her hair carefully and studied herself in the mirror. She looked pale and tired, but there was a new determination in her eyes. She would not let these people break her. She would not let Thomas's memory be tarnished by lies and innuendo. When she emerged, Matthew was waiting patiently, having taken the time to water his horse and check on her animals. "You look strong," he said simply. "Ready." "As ready as I will ever be," Penelope replied. They rode into town together, Penelope on Thomas's horse and Matthew beside her on his own mount. The 5-mile journey felt both too long and too short. With every step closer to Quartzsite, Penelope's anxiety grew, but Matthew's steady presence beside her helped keep her grounded. The small church on Main Street was already filling with people when they arrived. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as people caught sight of Penelope and Matthew riding up together. The whispers started immediately, a new layer of scandal added to the existing gossip. Now the widow was not just a suspected murderess, but she had already taken up with another man mere days after her husband's death. Matthew helped Penelope dismount, very aware of the dozens of eyes watching their every move. He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together, they walked toward the church entrance. Sarah Cunningham stood near the door with a cluster of other women, her face twisted in shock and disapproval. "Well, I never," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The nerve of some people, showing up here as if nothing happened." Matthew stopped directly in front of her, fixing her with a hard stare. "Mrs. Cunningham, I believe you owe Mrs. Owens an apology for the lies you have been spreading about her." Sarah's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I have only told the truth. Everyone knows what she did." "Everyone knows gossip and speculation," Matthew corrected her. "But I knew Thomas Owens, and I know what really killed him. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to build a life for his wife. He ignored his failing health because he was too stubborn to admit he needed help. That is what killed him, Mrs. Cunningham, not poison, not his wife. His own determination and pride." A crowd was gathering now, people leaving the church to see what the commotion was about. The preacher, Reverend Holloway, emerged from the doorway looking concerned. "What is going on here?" "I am simply defending an innocent woman's honor," Matthew said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "A woman who has been unjustly accused and persecuted by people who should know better." "The evidence speaks for itself," Mr. Whitmore said, stepping forward from the crowd. "She bought poison, and then her husband died of poisoning. It does not take a genius to put 2 and 2 together." "Thomas Owens did not die of poisoning," Matthew shot back. "He died of organ failure brought on by exhaustion and illness. Dr. Morrison said as much." "Or are you calling the doctor a liar, Dr. Morrison?" An elderly man with white whiskers pushed his way through the crowd. "Now see here, young man, I never said anything about poisoning. Thomas's symptoms were consistent with severe gastric distress and systemic failure. I saw no evidence of poisoning. Then why did you not say something when people started accusing Mrs. Owens?" Matthew demanded. The doctor had the grace to look ashamed. "I assumed the truth would come out eventually. I did not want to get involved in town politics." "A woman's life is being destroyed and you did not want to get involved." Matthew's voice was full of contempt. "What kind of doctor are you?" "Now hold on," the banker protested. "Even if she did not poison him, there are questions about her character. Taking up with another man so soon after her husband's death, for instance." "I am not taking up with anyone," Penelope said, finding her voice at last. "Mr. Hawkins knew my husband and has graciously offered to help me during this difficult time. He is being a decent human being, which is more than I can say for most of you." Her words were met with uncomfortable silence. Several people looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "My husband is dead," Penelope continued, her voice growing stronger. "The man I loved more than life itself is gone, and instead of receiving comfort and support from my community, I have been accused of murder, threatened, and ostracized. All because Sarah Cunningham saw me buy rat poison for the rodents in my barn and decided to turn it into a scandal." "I was just concerned," Sarah protested weakly. "You were bored and looking for excitement," Penelope said bluntly. "And you did not care whose life you destroyed in the process. Well, I am done hiding and I am done apologizing for things I did not do. I love Thomas with all my heart. I would have done anything to save him. And if you cannot believe that, if you would rather believe vicious gossip than the truth, then that says more about you than it does about me." The crowd was silent now, many people looking distinctly uncomfortable. Reverend Holloway cleared his throat. "Mrs. Owens, I believe I speak for many people here when I say we may have been too quick to judge. Grief and tragedy can bring out the worst in people sometimes, make us see conspiracy where there is only misfortune." "Pretty words, Reverend," Matthew said coldly, "but words will not give Mrs. Owens back her reputation or her home. The bank has already called in her loan based on these false accusations. Mr. Pritchard's men have been threatening her, trying to force her to sell her land for a fraction of its worth. You want to make this right. Start by actually standing up for what is true and just." Samuel Pritchard himself pushed through the crowd, his florid face set in an expression of false concern. "Now see here, Hawkins. My men were simply delivering a business proposition. If Mrs. Owens felt threatened, that was not the intention. Your man told her things would get difficult for her if she did not sell," Matthew said flatly. "That is not a business proposition. That is a threat. And everyone here knows you have been trying to get your hands on her water rights for years." Pritchard's mask of concern slipped, replaced by anger. "You are new to this town, boy. You would do well to watch your tongue." "Or what?" Matthew challenged. "You will have your hired thugs pay me a visit. I have dealt with men like you before, Pritchard. Bullies who use money and influence to get what they want, who prey on the weak and the vulnerable. Well, Mrs. Owens is not weak, and she is not alone anymore." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Pritchard looked like he wanted to respond, but he was aware of all the eyes watching him. If he said the wrong thing now, it would confirm everything Matthew was accusing him of. "This conversation is over," Pritchard finally said. "You will regret making an enemy of me, Hawkins." "I do not think I will," Matthew replied calmly. Pritchard stalked off to his waiting carriage, several of his men following him. The crowd began to disperse, people muttering among themselves and throwing glances back at Penelope and Matthew. Dr. Morrison approached them, his expression apologetic. "Mrs. Owens, I should have spoken up sooner. I will put in writing that your husband died of natural causes if that will help." "It will," Matthew said before Penelope could respond. "And you should give a copy to Mr. Whitmore at the bank." Mrs. Owens's loan should be reinstated immediately. The banker, who had been trying to slip away unnoticed, stopped in his tracks. "Now see here, that is a business decision that I cannot simply reverse." "You made the decision based on false information," Matthew pointed out. "Mrs. Owens has done nothing to warrant losing her home. Reinstate the loan, or I will make sure everyone in this territory knows that the Quartzsite Bank punishes innocent widows based on gossip." Whitmore looked trapped. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "I will review the matter tomorrow morning." "See that you do," Matthew said. As people filtered into the church for the service, Penelope found herself shaking with reaction to everything that had just happened. Matthew had done it. He had actually stood up to the entire town and defended her honor in front of everyone. She had not thought it was possible, had not believed anyone would take her side against the weight of public opinion. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you so much." "You do not need to thank me," Matthew said gently. "I just told them the truth. They needed to hear it." "Will you come inside for the service?" Penelope asked. Matthew glanced at the church, then back at her. "If you want me to, I do," Penelope said. "I would feel better having you there." They entered the church together and sat in the back pew, aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. But this time, the whispers seemed less hostile, more uncertain. Matthew had planted seeds of doubt in the collective mind of the town, and those seeds were already taking root. The service passed in a blur for Penelope. She stood when she was supposed to stand, sat when she was supposed to sit, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying the scene outside the church, the way Matthew had fearlessly confronted her accusers and demanded they face the truth. No one had ever stood up for her like that before, not even Thomas in his gentle way. After the service, several people approached her with awkward apologies. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, actually took Penelope's hand and said, "I am sorry for my harsh words at the funeral, dear. I should not have judged you so quickly. It was not much, but it was a start." Slowly, painfully, the tide of public opinion was beginning to turn. Matthew escorted Penelope back to her horse, and they rode out of town together. Neither spoke until they were well away from curious eyes and ears. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," Penelope said finally. "You stood up to the entire town for me." "They needed someone to tell them the truth," Matthew said simply. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "It was more than that," Penelope insisted. "You put your own reputation on the line to defend mine. You made enemies today, Matthew. Pritchard will not forget this." "Let him remember it," Matthew said with a shrug. "I am not afraid of Samuel Pritchard." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the desert stretching out around them in all directions. Penelope found herself acutely aware of Matthew's presence beside her, the solid strength of him, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from every move he made. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I am going to help you get your ranch back on its feet," Matthew replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You have cattle that need tending, repairs that need making, and a property that needs defending. You cannot do it all alone, and I have some time before winter sets in." "I cannot pay you," Penelope warned. "I barely have enough money to cover my immediate expenses." "Did I ask for payment?" Matthew countered. "Thomas was my friend. Helping his widow is the right thing to do. Besides, I like hard work. Keeps a man honest." Penelope felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she could not quite name. It was too soon after Thomas's death to call it attraction, too complicated by grief and gratitude. But there was something about Matthew Hawkins that drew her to him, made her feel safe and protected in a way she had not felt in a long time. They spent the rest of the day working together on the ranch. Matthew assessed the property with a practiced eye, noting repairs that needed to be made and problems that needed addressing. The cattle were in decent shape, but needed better grazing rotation. The barn roof had several leaks. The fencing along the eastern boundary was falling apart. Thomas was trying to do all of this himself. Matthew asked incredulously as the list of necessary work grew longer. He was so determined to prove he could make this ranch successful, Penelope explained. He came from a poor family back in Missouri. He wanted to build something, to be somebody. I kept telling him we had time, that we did not need to do everything at once, but he would not listen. "Pride can kill a man as surely as a bullet," Matthew observed sadly. "Thomas should have asked for help. He did not want people to think he could not handle it," Penelope said. Especially not after he married me. My family had money, you see. Not a lot, but enough. Some people in town said I married beneath me, that Thomas was a nobody trying to climb the social ladder. He was so desperate to prove them wrong, to show everyone that he was worthy of me. Matthew turned to look at her directly. Anyone who looked at you two together could see you loved each other. That should have been enough proof for anyone. You would think so, Penelope said wistfully, but people see what they want to see. As the sun began to set, Matthew prepared to head back to the Brennan Ranch where he had been staying. I will be back tomorrow morning, he promised. We will start working through that list of repairs. Matthew, you do not have to do this, Penelope said. You have already done so much. I want to, Matthew said simply. Get some rest, Penelope. Things are going to get better from here. After he left, Penelope went inside and made herself a simple supper. She sat at the table, acutely aware of the empty chair across from her where Thomas used to sit. The grief hit her in waves, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes manageable. Tonight it was bittersweet, mixed with a confused tangle of emotions she was not ready to examine too closely. She had loved Thomas. She still loved Thomas. But she could not deny that she felt drawn to Matthew in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. It was too soon, too complicated, too fraught with potential for heartache. Yet she could not stop thinking about the way he had defended her, the strength and conviction in his voice as he faced down her accusers. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Matthew would arrive at dawn and work alongside Penelope until sunset. Together, they repaired the barn roof, mended fences, moved the cattle to better grazing areas, and generally brought the ranch back from the edge of collapse. Matthew was a tireless worker, skilled at everything he put his hand to, and he had a dry sense of humor that occasionally made Penelope forget her grief long enough to laugh. The people of Quartzsite slowly began to accept that Penelope was innocent of any wrongdoing. Dr. Morrison had indeed written a formal statement about the cause of Thomas's death, and the bank had reluctantly reinstated her loan. Sarah Cunningham still avoided her, too embarrassed by her role in spreading false gossip to apologize directly, but the other women in town had begun speaking to Penelope again. Pritchard, however, remained a problem. His men continued to watch the ranch from a distance, and there were several incidents of vandalism that seemed designed to intimidate. A section of fence was cut, allowing cattle to wander off. The water pump was mysteriously damaged. Nothing that could be directly traced back to Pritchard, but the message was clear. He had not given up on acquiring her land. One evening in early November, as they were finishing up the day's work, Matthew brought up the subject that had been weighing on both their minds. Pritchard is not going to stop, you know. He wants this land, and he is willing to make your life miserable until you give in. I know, Penelope said wearily, but what can I do? I cannot prove he is behind the vandalism, and even if I could, he owns half the town. No one would dare testify against him. You could sell to someone else, Matthew suggested carefully. Someone who would pay fair value and keep the land out of Pritchard's hands, who would buy it. Everyone knows Pritchard wants it. No one will cross him. Matthew was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, I would buy it. Penelope stared at him in shock. What? I have been saving my wages for years, living cheap and putting money away. I have enough to make you a fair offer, enough to let you start over somewhere else if that is what you want. And I would keep working the land, keep it productive. Pritchard would not get his hands on it. Matthew, I could not ask you to do that, Penelope protested. This is my problem, not yours. You are not asking, I am offering, Matthew pointed out, and it would not just be for you. I meant what I said about wanting to settle down. This is good land, Penelope. It could be a real home for someone willing to work it. "For you?" Penelope asked softly. Matthew met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip a beat. Maybe, if the circumstances were right. The air between them suddenly felt charged with unspoken possibility. Penelope was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the fading sunlight caught the strong lines of Matthew's face. It had been 2 months since Thomas's death, and while the grief was still there, it had become less sharp, less all-consuming. In its place, other feelings had begun to emerge, feelings she had been trying desperately to ignore. "I need to think about it," she said, breaking eye contact and stepping back. "It is a big decision." "Take all the time you need," Matthew said gently. "I am not going anywhere." That night, Penelope lay awake for hours, her mind churning with possibilities and complications. Selling the ranch made practical sense. She could not work it alone, and the constant pressure from Pritchard was exhausting. But this land represented everything she and Thomas had dreamed of building together. Giving it up felt like betraying his memory. On the other hand, what would Thomas want for her? Would he want her to cling to this place out of stubbornness, making herself miserable in the process? Or would he want her to be happy, to find a way forward even if it meant letting go of the past? And then there was Matthew. Kind, steadfast Matthew, who had appeared in her life like a guardian angel and refused to leave even when things got difficult. She cared about him, she realized. More than cared about him. The thought of him leaving, of going back to his drifting life on other ranches, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with grief. But it was too soon. Surely it was too soon to be feeling this way about another man. She had loved Thomas. She still loved Thomas. Did not that mean something? The next morning, Penelope woke with a sense of clarity she had not felt in weeks. She made breakfast and was waiting on the porch when Matthew rode up at his usual time. "I have been thinking about your offer," she said without preamble. "And I want to make a counter-proposal." Matthew dismounted and approached the porch, his expression curious. "I am listening." "I do not want to sell the ranch," Penelope said, "but I cannot work it alone and I cannot afford to hire help, so I am proposing a partnership. You invest your savings into improvements and livestock, and we split the profits. You get a home, I keep my land, and together we build something that neither of us could do alone." Matthew considered this for a long moment. "And what about Pritchard?" "He will see me as competition, maybe even as a threat. Things could get ugly." "Things are already ugly," Penelope pointed out. "At least this way we face them together." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. "Partners, then, I like it." They shook hands to seal the deal, and Penelope felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. This could work. They could make this work. The partnership changed the dynamic between them in subtle ways. Matthew moved his belongings from the Brennan Ranch to the small bunkhouse on Penelope's property, giving him a permanent presence on the land. They worked side by side every day, planning improvements and making decisions together. Matthew's savings allowed them to purchase better breeding stock and make long-needed repairs to the property. The people of Quartzsite watched this development with interest and, in some cases, disapproval. A widow living in close proximity to an unmarried man raised eyebrows, even if they maintained separate residences. But Penelope was beyond caring what the gossips thought. She had already survived their worst accusations. This was nothing in comparison. November turned into December, and the Arizona winter brought cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Penelope and Matthew settled into a comfortable routine, developing the kind of easy familiarity that came from shared work and mutual respect. Matthew was careful to maintain proper boundaries, always treating Penelope with the utmost respect and never presuming on their friendship. but the attraction between them was undeniable, simmering just beneath the surface of every interaction. A brush of hands as they worked together. A lingering glance across the dinner table on the evenings when Penelope invited him in for a meal. The way Matthew's voice softened when he said her name. Penelope found herself thinking about him constantly. The way he laughed at something funny. The competent way he handled the livestock. The gentleness he showed toward her when her grief threatened to overwhelm her. She was falling for him, she realized, with a mixture of joy and terror. Falling hard and fast, and there did not seem to be anything she could do to stop it. But guilt gnawed at her. How could she be developing feelings for another man when Thomas had been gone less than 3 months? What kind of wife did that make her? What kind of person? The crisis came just before Christmas. Penelope had been visiting Thomas's grave, something she did every week, and found herself crying harder than she had in weeks. She felt torn between the past and the present, between honoring Thomas's memory and embracing the possibility of a future with Matthew. Matthew found her there as the sun was setting, having come looking for her when she did not return home at her usual time. He sat down beside her on the cold ground, not saying anything, just offering his presence as comfort. "I feel like I am betraying him," Penelope finally said through her tears. "It has only been a few months and I am already thinking about someone else. What does that say about me? About how much I really loved him?" Matthew was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My mother died when I was 17, he said at last. "Cancer. It was slow and painful, and we all knew it was coming. My father sat by her bedside every day for months, holding her hand, taking care of her. After she passed, he was devastated. We both were." He paused, staring out at the desert landscape painted gold by the setting sun. "About 6 months later, my father started courting a widow from the next town over. I was angry at first, felt like he was dishonoring my mother's memory. But one night, he sat me down and explained something to me. He said that loving someone new did not mean he had stopped loving my mother. The heart does not work that way. It does not replace one love with another. It just grows to make room for more." Penelope turned to look at him, tears still streaming down her face. "My father said that my mother would have wanted him to be happy, to find companionship and love again. She would not have wanted him to spend the rest of his life alone, mourning her. That was not how she loved him, with conditions and restrictions. She loved him freely, and part of that love was wanting the best for him, even after she was gone." "Do you think Thomas would feel that way?" Penelope whispered. "I knew Thomas," Matthew said gently. "Not as well as you did, but well enough to know that he loved you with everything he had. And I think if he could see you now, he would want you to be happy. He would want you to live, Penelope. Really live, not just exist in a state of perpetual mourning." "But it has only been a few months," Penelope protested weakly. "There is no right timeline for grief," Matthew said. "Some people need years. Some people need less time. There is no rule that says you have to suffer for a certain period before you are allowed to feel happiness again. You loved Thomas. You will always love Thomas, but that does not mean you cannot also love someone else." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "Someone like me." Penelope knew he was offering her more than comfort and philosophical musings. He was offering himself, his heart, a future together if she was willing to take the risk. "I am scared," she admitted. "Scared of what people will say, scared of dishonoring Thomas's memory, scared of what I am feeling for you." Matthew reached out and gently took her hand. "I am scared too," he confessed. "Scared that I am pushing too hard, too fast. Scared that you will always see me as second best, a substitute for the man you really loved. Scared that I am taking advantage of your vulnerability." "You could never be second best," Penelope said fiercely. and you are not taking advantage of anything. You have been nothing but honorable and kind since the moment you rode into my life." "Then what do you want, Penelope?" Matthew asked softly. "Tell me what you want, and I will do everything in my power to make it happen." Penelope looked at him, really looked at him. At the honest, decent man who had defended her when no one else would, who had worked tirelessly to help her save her ranch, who had been patient and understanding as she navigated her complicated grief. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she saw him each morning, the way his smile could brighten even her darkest days, the way she felt safe and cherished in his presence. "I want to stop feeling guilty for caring about you," she said finally. "I want to honor Thomas's memory while also allowing myself to move forward, and I want to see where this thing between us might lead if we give it a chance." Matthew's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. "I can work with that," he said. He helped her to her feet, and they stood there beside Thomas's grave as the last light faded from the sky. Penelope placed her hand on the simple headstone. "I loved you, Thomas," she whispered. "I will always love you, and I think, somehow, you would be happy that Matthew found me. That I am not alone." She felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if Thomas himself had given his blessing. It was probably her imagination or wishful thinking, but it felt real nonetheless. Matthew walked her back to her horse, and they rode home together through the gathering darkness. Something had shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were moving from friendship into something deeper. Christmas came, and Penelope and Matthew spent it together on the ranch. They exchanged simple gifts. She gave him a new pair of work gloves she had carefully stitched herself. He gave her a beautiful hand-carved jewelry box with her initials inlaid in different colored wood. "When did you have time to make this?" Penelope asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Nights working in the bunkhouse," Matthew admitted. "I have been working on it for a few weeks. I wanted you to have something special, something that showed how much you mean to me." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were happy tears. "It is beautiful, Matthew. Thank you." They shared a quiet dinner together, and afterward, as they sat by the fire, Matthew reached out and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched with clear romantic intent, and Penelope felt her pulse quicken at the contact. "Is this all right?" Matthew asked, ever careful of her feelings. "Yes," Penelope said. "It is more than all right." They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand, watching the fire burn down to embers. No words were necessary. They both knew what was happening, the slow, steady building of something precious and real. As winter gave way to early spring, their relationship deepened. Matthew courted her properly, bringing her wildflowers from the desert, taking her on rides to beautiful spots in the surrounding countryside, always treating her with respect and tenderness. Their first kiss came on a warm March evening, gentle and sweet, full of promise. Penelope had worried that kissing Matthew would feel like a betrayal, but instead it felt like coming home. Different from kissing Thomas, but no less meaningful. Matthew kissed her like she was precious, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I know it is soon, and I know the situation is complicated, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Penelope Owens." "I love you too," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but you have made me believe in second chances." They were married in April of 1884, a simple ceremony in the church where Matthew had first defended her honor. Many of the townspeople attended, genuinely happy for the couple who had overcome so much adversity. Even Sarah Cunningham came, offering a grudging congratulations and a more sincere apology for the trouble she had caused. Samuel Pritchard did not attend, but he sent a wedding gift anyway, a silver tea service that probably cost more than most people in Quartzsite made in a year. The card simply read, "No hard feelings." Penelope and Matthew both knew it was his way of admitting defeat. He had finally accepted that he would not be getting his hands on their land. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Matthew's skill with cattle and Penelope's careful financial planning made for a winning combination. They expanded their herd, improved their breeding stock, and became known throughout the territory for quality livestock. More importantly, they built a life together based on love, respect, and partnership. Matthew never tried to overshadow Penelope or make her feel like anything less than his equal. They made decisions together, worked together, and supported each other through both good times and bad. In January of 1885, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of starting a family with Matthew, but also a bittersweet ache for the children she might have had with Thomas. Matthew understood her complicated feelings and gave her space to process them without judgment. "This baby is ours," he told her, holding her close. "But Thomas will always be a part of your story, a part of who you are. I do not expect you to forget him or pretend he never existed. He helped make you into the strong, amazing woman I fell in love with." Their son was born in September of 1885, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas Matthew Hawkins, honoring both the past and the present. Holding her son for the first time, Penelope felt a sense of completeness she had not experienced in years. The grief for Thomas would always be part of her, a quiet ache in her heart, but it no longer defined her existence. She had built a new life, one filled with love and purpose and hope for the future. Matthew proved to be a devoted father, handling their son with surprising gentleness for such a large man. He would spend hours rocking the baby to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice, or just watching their son with an expression of wonder on his face. "I cannot believe he is ours," Matthew would say, shaking his head in amazement, "that we made this perfect little person." "Believe it," Penelope would reply, leaning against his shoulder. "We are a family now, Matthew, a real family." The years passed peacefully. Young Thomas grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. In 1887, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Rose. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Penelope and Matthew's partnership became the stuff of local legend, proof that hard work and dedication could overcome any obstacle. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew took Penelope on a picnic to the spot where they had first talked about their feelings for each other, beside Thomas's grave. The headstone had weathered over the years, but they kept it well maintained, bringing fresh flowers regularly and teaching their children about the man whose death had, in a strange way, brought their parents together. "You ever regret it?" Matthew asked as they sat together watching the sunset. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking a chance on a drifter cowboy with nothing but savings and determination." Penelope looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Regret marrying the man who defended my honor when everyone else abandoned me. The man who has given me 3 beautiful children and a life beyond my wildest dreams. Matthew Hawkins, you ask the strangest questions sometimes." Matthew laughed, pulling her close. "I just want to make sure you are happy. That has always been my goal from the very beginning. Your happiness." "I am happy," Penelope assured him. "Happier than I ever thought possible after Thomas died. You gave me back my life, Matthew. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never love again, and a future when I could not see past the next day. How could I possibly regret that?" "I love you," Matthew said, kissing her forehead. "I will love you until my dying day and beyond." "And I love you," Penelope replied. "My defender, my partner, my heart." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. Behind them, their 3 children played in the grass, their laughter carrying on the desert breeze. The ranch that Penelope and Thomas had started, and that Penelope and Matthew had saved and built into something remarkable, stretched out around them in all directions. Life had been cruel to Penelope Owens, taking away the man she loved, and then trying to destroy her reputation and her future. But life had also been kind, bringing Matthew Hawkins into her world at exactly the moment she needed him most. He had stood up for her when no one else would, had defended her honor in front of everyone, and had loved her through her grief into a new and beautiful chapter of her life. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of loss, the terror of false accusations, the slow rebuilding of her life and reputation, and finally, the joy of finding love again with a man who cherished her completely. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. "Everything," Penelope said. "How strange life is, how we never know what is waiting around the next corner. If someone had told me on the day of Thomas's funeral that I would someday be this happy again, I would not have believed them. I could not have imagined it." "Thomas would be glad," Matthew said quietly. "That you found happiness, that you did not let what happened destroy you." "I had help," Penelope reminded him. "A certain cowboy who rode into my life and refused to let me give up." "Best decision I ever made," Matthew said. "Getting involved, I mean. Some of the other hands at the Brennan place told me I was crazy, that I should not get mixed up in town drama. But I could not just stand by and watch them destroy you. It was not right." "I am grateful you did not listen to them," Penelope said. "I am grateful for everything you have done, everything you are. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Matthew." Their children came running over then, demanding attention and stories before bedtime. Matthew scooped up Emily while Penelope took Samuel's hand. Young Thomas, at 9 years old, walked independently but stayed close to his parents. "Tell us about how you met," Emily demanded, as she often did. She loved hearing the story of her parents' courtship, though they carefully edited out the more painful details for her young ears. "Well," Matthew began, launching into a simplified version of events. "I met your mother when she was going through a very difficult time. Some people in town were not being very nice to her, and I decided that was not acceptable. So I stood up and told everyone the truth, that your mother was a good person who deserved to be treated with respect." "And then you fell in love?" Emily asked with the romantic enthusiasm of a 6-year-old. "Eventually," Penelope said, smiling at the memory. "It took time and we became friends first. But yes, eventually we fell in love, and got married and had us," Samuel added, bouncing with excitement. "That is right," Matthew confirmed, "and we have lived happily ever after since then." It was a simplified version of a much more complicated story, but it captured the essential truth. They had found each other in the midst of tragedy and adversity, and they had built something beautiful together. That night, after the children were asleep, Penelope and Matthew sat together on their front porch, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the desert night. These quiet moments together were precious, time to reconnect and remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. "Do you think we will ever tell the children the whole story?" Penelope asked. About Thomas, about the accusations, about how close I came to losing everything. Someday, Matthew said, when they are old enough to understand, it is part of their history too, in a way. Part of how they came to be. I want them to know about Thomas, Penelope said, to understand that loving you does not mean forgetting him, that the heart is big enough for all of it. They will know, Matthew assured her. We will make sure they understand that love is not a limited resource. That caring for one person does not diminish what you feel for another. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, then headed inside to their shared bed. As Penelope drifted off to sleep in Matthew's arms, she sent a silent thank you to Thomas, wherever he might be. Thank you for loving me, for teaching me what a good marriage could be, and for somehow sending Matthew into my life when I needed him most. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Young Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. Emily inherited her mother's head for business and helped manage the financial side of the operation. Samuel, the youngest, showed a natural talent with horses that amazed everyone. In 1895, when young Thomas turned 20, he married a sweet girl named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and Penelope and Matthew became grandparents the following year. Holding her first grandchild, a beautiful baby girl named Lily, Penelope felt the circle of life completing itself in the most wonderful way. Thomas would have loved this, she said to Matthew, tears streaming down her face as she rocked her granddaughter. Being a grandfather. He would have, Matthew agreed. But I think he is proud of you, Penelope. Proud of what you built, what you survived, how you created this wonderful family. We created it, Penelope corrected. You and me together. None of this would have been possible without you. By the time they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, Penelope and Matthew had 4 grandchildren and another on the way. The ranch had expanded to include several thousand acres, and they employed a dozen ranch hands to help with the work. They had become pillars of the quartzsite community, respected and admired by everyone who knew them. The story of how they met, how Matthew had defended Penelope's honor against false accusations, had become local legend. Young people in town spoke of it as an example of true love and moral courage. The older generation, many of whom remembered the actual events, spoke of it with a mixture of shame at how they had treated Penelope and admiration for how the couple had overcome such adversity. Sarah Cunningham, now elderly and somewhat mellowed with age, had apologized numerous times over the years for her role in spreading the initial gossip. Penelope had forgiven her, understanding that people made mistakes and that holding grudges served no purpose. Even Samuel Pritchard, before his death in 1899, had made a point of telling Matthew and Penelope that he respected what they had built together. You won fair and square, he had said. Made me look like a fool, but I suppose I deserved it. You have got good land there, and you have worked it well. No hard feelings. As they grew older together, Penelope and Matthew's love only deepened. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, faced challenges and triumphs side by side, and built a legacy that would last for generations. On a warm spring evening in 1910, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Penelope reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From the depths of grief and despair to the heights of love and happiness, she had experienced it all. No regrets. Matthew asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them over the years. Not a single one, Penelope replied, squeezing his hand. Every moment, good and bad, led me here, led me to you. How could I regret that? Matthew pulled her close, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, The ranch they had built together thrived. In the house behind them, the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted through the open windows. Their children, now adults with families of their own, would be arriving soon for Sunday dinner, a tradition that Penelope and Matthew had established years ago and maintained faithfully. "I love you," Matthew said, as he did every day without fail. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing at Thomas's graveside, refusing to break under the weight of their judgment. I knew then that you were someone special, someone worth fighting for." "And I love you," Penelope replied. "You gave me back my life, Matthew. You stood up for me when no one else would, defended my honor in front of everyone, and showed me that it was possible to love again after loss. You are my hero, my partner, my everything." They kissed then, a gentle joining of lips that still held passion even after more than 2 decades of marriage. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. "Tell me the story again," Matthew said, a request that surprised Penelope since he usually played along when the grandchildren asked but rarely requested it himself. "Which story?" Penelope asked, though she knew exactly which one he meant. "Our story," Matthew said. "How we met, how we fell in love. I like hearing you tell it." So Penelope told him the story of the widow who was blamed for her husband's passing, and the cowboy who defended her honor in front of everyone. She told him about the false accusations and the near loss of everything she held dear. She told him about his courage in standing up to the town, about their partnership and slow building friendship that eventually blossomed into love. "And then we got married," Penelope said, coming to the part of the story that never failed to make her smile. "And we built this life together, this beautiful, wonderful life that I treasure more than anything. The best decision I ever made," Matthew said. "Defending you that day, it changed both our lives." "It gave us both a future," Penelope agreed. "Together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children and grandchildren arrived for dinner. The house filled with laughter and conversation, the sounds of a family that was loved and cherished. Penelope looked around the table at all the faces, these people who existed because she and Matthew had found each other, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren were playing outside, young Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us that love can conquer any obstacle, that standing up for what is right matters, and that family is everything. Thank you for the example you have set for all of us." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at Matthew, seeing her own emotions reflected in his face. "Thank you," Matthew said quietly to the assembled family. "All of you. You are the greatest blessing of our lives." The evening ended with everyone sitting on the porch together, watching the stars and sharing stories. The grandchildren begged for tales of the old days, of cowboys and cattle drives, of building the ranch from almost nothing into what it was today. Matthew told them about the first time he met Penelope, carefully editing the details for young ears but keeping the essential truth of the story intact. "I saw someone who needed help," he said, "and I could not walk away. It was the best decision I ever made, because you fell in love." One of the grandchildren asked. "Because I did the right thing," Matthew corrected gently. "The love came later as a gift for trying to be the person I wanted to be. Never do the right thing because you expect a reward. Do it because it is right. Everything else will follow." It was a lesson he and Penelope had taught their children, and that their children were now teaching the next generation. Do what is right, stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, and build a life based on love and integrity. As the evening grew late and families began heading home, Penelope and Matthew were left alone once more. They cleaned up the remnants of the gathering together, working in the comfortable silence of a couple who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. "It was a good day," Penelope said as they prepared for bed. "Every day with you is a good day," Matthew replied, making her laugh at his sentimentality. "You are impossible," she said fondly. "Impossibly in love with you," Matthew countered, pulling her into his arms. They fell asleep that night as they had every night for more than 25 years, wrapped in each other's embrace, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The years continued their steady march forward. Penelope and Matthew aged gracefully, their hair turning gray but their love remaining as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults, saw their own children become grandparents themselves, and continued to run the ranch with the help of their extended family. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. People came from all over the territory to honor the couple whose love story had inspired so many. The party lasted well into the night, filled with music and dancing and storytelling. At one point, Penelope slipped away from the crowd and walked to the small family cemetery on the edge of the property. Thomas's grave was there, along with several other family members who had passed over the years. She knelt beside the weathered headstone, placing fresh flowers as she had done countless times before. "I hope you are proud of what I built, Thomas," she said softly. "I hope you know that loving Matthew has never diminished what I felt for you. You will always be my first love, the man who showed me what marriage could be. But Matthew has been my partner in building this life, this family, this legacy. And I think, somehow, you sent him to me, a final gift from beyond the grave." She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Matthew standing behind her. "I wondered where you went," he said gently. "Just visiting," Penelope replied, standing and brushing off her skirt. "Telling Thomas about the party, about all the wonderful people who came to celebrate with us." "I am sure he is happy for us," Matthew said, putting his arm around her waist. "Wherever he is." They stood together for a moment in respectful silence, then walked back to the party hand in hand. Their family and friends surrounded them with love and laughter, celebrating not just a marriage but a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, of second chances, and of love that can bloom even in the darkest circumstances. As the sun set on their 30th anniversary, Penelope looked at Matthew and saw not just her husband but her best friend, her partner, her defender, and the love of her life. He had been all those things and more, from the moment he rode into her life and refused to let injustice stand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Matthew asked. "For everything," Penelope replied. "For defending me when I could not defend myself, for believing in me when no one else did, for loving me through grief and doubt and fear. For building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. For every sunrise we have watched together and every sunset we will watch in the future. Thank you for all of it." Matthew pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for letting me love you," he said. "For taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who had nothing but determination and a strong sense of right and wrong. You made me a better man, Penelope. You gave my life meaning and purpose." "We gave each other those things," Penelope corrected. "That is what partnership means." They rejoined the party, dancing together as their family looked on with smiles and happy tears. It was a perfect ending to a perfect day, a celebration of everything they had built together and everything they still had to look forward to. Years later, when Penelope was in her 70s and Matthew in his late 70s, they still ran the ranch together with help from their large extended family. They were slower now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their minds remained sharp and their love as strong as ever. On a quiet evening in late autumn, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The desert air was cool and crisp, perfect weather for reflecting on a life well lived. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked, though she knew Matthew remembered it as clearly as she did. "I remember a brave woman standing alone against the judgment of an entire town," Matthew said. "I remember knowing that I could not walk away, that I had to do something to help. I remember the first time you smiled at me, the first time you laughed. I remember every moment, Penelope." "We have had a good life," Penelope said contentedly. "The best life," Matthew agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch hummed with the quiet activity of evening chores being finished, dinner being prepared, a family going about the comfortable routines of their lives. "I love you," Penelope said, as she did every evening. "I love you too," Matthew replied, as he had every evening for more than 30 years. "Always and forever." As the stars wheeled overhead and the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, Penelope and Matthew sat together. Two people who had found each other in the midst of tragedy and built something beautiful. Their love story, born from injustice and defended with courage, had become the foundation for a legacy that would endure for generations. The widow who had been blamed for her husband's passing had found not just vindication but a second chance at happiness. The cowboy who had defended her honor in front of everyone had found not just purpose, but a love that transcended all obstacles. Together, they had proven that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that true love, when combined with courage and conviction, can overcome anything. Their story would be told for years to come in Quartzsite, Arizona, a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, the possibility of finding love even after loss, and the enduring strength of two people who chose to build a life together despite all the odds stacked against them. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, of love that conquered all. And it was, in every way that mattered, a story with a truly happy ending.